Good afternoon and welcome to our Facebook Live conversation, Get to Know the OAH, a conversation with OAH Leadership. My name is Beth Marsh and I'm the Director of Membership, Marketing, and Communications for the organization. This is the first in a new series of conversations that we will be hosting. Joining us today are our guests, Erica Lee, who is our Vice President. She is also a Professor of History at the University of Minnesota, where she directs the Immigration History and Research Center. Next, we have Beachley, who is the chair of our membership committee and is also a faculty member at the College of Southern Nevada. Beth English is joining us today as well. She is our new executive director. And last, we have Phil Deloria, who is our president-elect and is a professor at Harvard University. And so I'm going to kick it over to you guys so that you all can do a more in-depth introduction of yourselves and then touch on why you decided to become volunteers within the organization. And then after you've made your introductions, if you want to start a conversation talking about what you see as the organization's role in the field of U.S. history, and then also why you would recommend membership to somebody who is not currently a member. So I'm going to turn it over to you and thank you very much.
I think that I'm the one who gets to start us off on this conversation. So I just wanted to say, hi, everyone. I'm Erica Lee. And I'm Vice President of the OAH and also a Professor of History and Asian American Studies at the University of Minnesota. And I think the first question that, that we've been tasked with answering is why? Why the OAH? Why are we involved? And I put some thought into this and I couldn't get this image and experience out of my mind. And it was my very first OAH as a grad student at UC Berkeley. I think it might have been my first or second year in the program. And I was like a fangirl, literally, sort of like, kind of, letting out these little screams when and it wasn't even seeing real people, it was simply seeing their names posted on a board. Eric Foner is going to be talking at 3 p.m. And I think for me as a grad student, it was just the realization that the books and articles that I was reading, poring over and sweating over in my grad seminars were attached to real people and that they were in the same vicinity as I was in this moment at the conference. And it made me feel like part of a profession. And I could not have imagined that over the years, the beginning steps of not presenting at panels, but simply, being in the back row of those panels and taking notes and watching some of these, esteemed scholars in person and just being awed by their scholarship and the ways in which they were able to communicate their ideas and answer questions so easily, to then, moving my way up so that I wasn't just sitting in the back, but was sitting maybe towards the middle. Maybe I asked a question. Eventually I was presenting. I was, very grateful for all of the career networking and opportunities that were available. I don't even think at that time that the career coach program existed. So the ways in which the OAH is really serving career track graduate students has just grown phenomenally since then. And I've just been so privileged that over the past many years, I've been able to rely on the OAH's work advancing scholarship to fine-tune my own work in terms of presenting, to receive important constructive criticism, to network and meet other scholars. This happens at the annual meeting, to be sure, but also has these afterlives. I've made some of my closest friends and colleagues from those initial initial meetings, those initial coffees, before and after sessions. It happened when my first article was vetted, reviewed, revised, and accepted finally for publication at the Journal of American History, a process that was extremely rigorous, but also incredibly helpful. And then more recently, I've been able to give back to this organization that helped me find my own footing and spread my wings. I was asked by former President Al Camarillo to serve as co-chair of the 2013 program in San Francisco. I served as a member of the editorial board of the Journal of American History, various other committees, and it has been, one of the greatest privileges and honors of my career to have been asked to serve as vice president. So I'm grateful for everything that the OAH has done for me, excited about what it has continued to do since I first had those fangirl moments when I was a graduate student, and really thrilled about the work that it has before us in the coming years.
So for me, I'm Deanna Beachley, and I teach at the College of Southern Nevada in Las Vegas, Nevada. And I teach at one of the largest community colleges, certainly the largest one in the state of Nevada. And for me, my experience is slightly different because as a community college faculty member and a scholar and trying to keep up with the discipline, what the OAH allowed for me as a young scholar, a young faculty member, was an opportunity to see people, to meet with scholars at universities and talk about work and discuss strategies. And then increasingly, I started noticing on the programs that there were specific events and things for community college faculty members. And that got me very interested. And then I was asked to speak at one of those community college workshops. And then that got me to be on the community college committee, and then chair the community college committee. And I've just appreciated the opportunity to get to know community college faculty members and to discuss the issues that are very particular to community colleges. Because for most of the students in the country, the historians that they meet are going to be at the community college level, right? And that's it's exciting, and it is incredibly demanding and incredibly rewarding. So it is really good to have an organization that takes that into account, right? That really tries to provide some opportunities for community college faculty members to get involved in the organization and to get involved and engaged with other scholars.
So am I next on deck? I think I might be. Hi, I'm Beth English, and I'm the new executive director of the organization. I just came on board in September, and historian by training, took a bit of a circuitous route to get to where I'm sitting right now. But I think it's a career path that is reflective of increasing numbers of PhD historians that come out of the academy these days. I was sort of a traditional, grad student thinking of academic track. I went to William and Mary, had great advisors, came out of that. And just for a number of reasons, I didn't end up on the academic track. I ended up actually in a research center and a public policy research center, which was a little weird for a historian to be in. But, for me, the OAH, I became a member of OAH when I was in grad school, and sort of reflective of Erica's experience. I would go to the meetings, and I'd be like, I know that person. Oh, you're on my comps reading list. Oh, and so that was all very exciting. But it also offered an opportunity to start to create connections and networks with other grad students that were outside of my university setting. I'm still in touch with some of those folks that I met at those early OAH meetings. And then, when I sort of shifted into sort of my professional career, it was still very much like Deanna was saying, a touchstone to keep up with what was happening in the field. I'd get my journal, see what the new scholarship was, had the opportunity to write some reviews for the journal, got a great email back in 2008 that said, hey, your essay was selected to be part of the OAH's best essay collection. So I was like, great, and even though what was really great about that for me is that even though I wasn't sitting in a history department, I wasn't, I wasn't regular faculty in a history department, I was still recognized as a historian. And I think the organization has always had this kind of broad conceptualization and understanding of what professional historians do. And a lot of folks are in the academy, a lot of folks aren't in the academy. They're independent scholars, they're in libraries, they're in archives, they're doing all kinds of cool and creative things. And so as the field is changing, I think OAH has really kept up with that in an important way. And so I hope, in my role as executive director, to be able to kind of harness a lot of those great things that the OAH does and help them keep up with changes in the field and where the field is going. And having kind of come out of a career path that is reflective, I think, of some of those changes, I'm hopeful will help inform some of that work. So Phil, I'll pass it off to you to round us out.
Okay, so I have a little bit of an origin story that's a bit like Erica's. So I went to grad school in American Studies. I wasn't really a historian. In fact, I was coming out of a music and a broadcasting sort of background. So I didn't actually know much about history. And I remember walking into Howard Lamar's office. He was my advisor, and seeing and being completely freaked out, right, by being in grad school and seeing this wall of bookshelves with 40 years worth of the Journal of American History, just like an entire bookshelf. And I thought, that's what it is to be a historian, is to have this sort of depth of engagement, around a professional organization and around a journal that's publishing, really interesting and solid scholarship. That's part A. Part B, when I was a grad student, and it may have been my first meeting or first or second meeting, someone had told me, all the networking things you must do. And someone had told me, you must go to the banquet. This is back when we actually, had a banquet. Most organizations have sort of let the banquet part of this go at the annual meeting. And so I went to the banquet just by myself, actually. And I picked a table and I put my stuff down and I kind of wandered away, and then I came back to the table, and it was the year that Larry Levine was president, and I had set myself up at Larry Levine's table. And I thought, oh my gosh, I have made the worst faux pas ever. I've taken a spot at the president's table. But in fact, what happened was Larry Levine, who was this wonderful, interesting, gregarious, smart person, just made, and all of his friends just made me so welcome. And here I was, this grad student who was just clueless as could be. And I thought, well, this is also, I guess, what it is. This is the good part of being, a professional historian. And so the OAH, for me, started out with these incredibly sort of warm, kind of memories. I went back and, like Erica, I thought, what did my trajectory look like a little bit? I went back and just sort of like searched Organization of American Historians, on my CV. And it turns out that, I did a lot of papers at the OAH pretty early on, more than I had actually, remembered. And so when the time came for, me to get that call to serve, I was really, I think, quite happy to do it. So I served on the editorial board of the Journal of American History. And then I had a year or two where I didn't do much for the OAH. And then boom, I was right on the National Council, and I was on the program committee. And, of course, there's the other committees all along the way that, you drop in and out of, the mentoring stuff that they sign you up for, all of which is really, quite good. I think, along the way, I've also, kind of passed a bit through academic administration, been departmental chair and an associate dean. And one of the great things about that is that the way in which your horizon just expands. When you've been a chair and you go back to the department, you're never quite the same person. When you've been in the dean's office and you go back to the department, you're never quite the same person, because you see things with a bigger kind of vision. And that, I think, is also what the OAH has given me, is that larger professional kind of horizon. I've always been a museum person. I've always still been interested in documentaries and video production and those kinds of things. And the OAH, you know, I think as Deanna mentioned, as Beth also mentioned, is this really big tent organization. It's quite unique, I think, in that. I mean, we all professional organizations want to have a big sort of portfolio of people, but the OAH's sustained interest in museum folks, community college folks, K-12 teachers, public historians, National Park Service. You know, it's quite an extensive sort of list. And, you know, sometimes these things are more ambition than they are actualized. But I think that the OAH, because of that ambition, you know, has been this really interesting place to think not just about narrowness of academic history, but about the largest dimensions, you know, of history in, you know, as it's practiced here in the US and beyond as well, right? The partnership with Japanese scholars, for example, with transnational and international scholars is also a really strong and important part of it. So it has been, for me, nothing but a gift. And so in that sense, I think, like all of us, it's sort of an honor to be able to give back, you know, to an organization.
I think one of the things that we're also supposed to be talking about is why the OAH matters now. You know, so not moving beyond just our own personal histories with the organization, but also the investment of the organization now. And just, you know, bridging off of what Phil was talking about, the way in which the OAH has become this big tent of doing, practicing, teaching US history and beyond, the professionalization, the work with public historians, with teachers of all levels of education. And I feel like the past 4 years and more, you know, have really tested us, historians, with the need to be part of public conversations in ways that may stretch our comfort level, may leave us vulnerable to trolling and other things that are not part of our graduate training, to be sure, but that also highlight exactly what is at stake and why historians need to be part of these larger conversations. You know, we had this an executive board meeting. I don't know, Beth, how many weeks ago, Phil? But directly after the attacks on the Capitol, and it was a meeting, or maybe it was just over email.
It was actually like 2 days ago.
It was just 2 days ago.
Time is elastic.
It was Monday night.
You know, okay, so clearly my practice of keeping track of time and change over time, which is what a historian's supposed to be doing, has just been thrown out the window. So on Monday night, we had these conversations earlier too. I think it must have been over email, but the conversation was, what is our role? What is the role of the OAH? And it was led by George Sanchez and Beth in first formulating a public statement, which you can see online. And one of the things that came up in conversation was this thing that had been really bugging me, watching the newscasters that day talking about, well, future historians will certainly have a lot to talk about when they talk about January 6, 2021. And I wanted to say, future historians, yeah, sure, yes, they will have a lot to say, but we are here. We're here now. We're in the, you know, we have a lot to say now. And I think that has been something that has changed, and something that I think the OAH continues to lead on through our extraordinary membership and esteemed scholarship, with folks out on the news programs and writing op-eds and in the classroom and teaching history as it happens. This is hard stuff. And the OAH, I think the response of the organization this week has been incredible with not only the statement, and I just pulled it up because I think there's a couple of lines here that are worth reading and sharing, in addition to having it be online. But it says, as historians of the United States, the OAH leadership believes that it is the responsibility of every American to understand and to think critically about the deep histories that help to make these disturbing events possible. The OAH remains committed to excellence in scholarship, teaching, and presentation of American history, thus helping all of us teach and educate in the current moment. And alongside this statement is a robust list of resources, open access articles on related topics from the Journal of American History, as well as from the American Historian and from the blog. This is responsive history. It amplifies the work of our membership. It makes it accessible to many more people beyond the confines, which can be narrow, of academia. And I'm just proud of the work that the OAH is doing in such an incredible and necessary time.
Since I've been serving on the membership committee and now chairing the membership committee, this is a conversation that we've had quite a bit at our annual meetings, is really what more can the OAH be doing to reach out to people to do things. And I think forums like this are absolutely essential, particularly in our pandemic times, right? That I think that's fundamentally going to change the way in which we continue to connect with one another and engage with the public and engage with other scholars, is through forums like this, through webinars and all of these opportunities that we may not have thought about before. But now that we've kind of been pushed in that direction, right, it's an absolute essential kind of thing to continue to do that and to build on this and think more creatively about how we can do this to reach outside of academia and into the wider public and engage in ways that I think it's absolutely essential and necessary.
Yeah, and if I could, in some ways, when Erica was talking about, historians and OAH members and the board and a variety of, different folks associated with the organization, sort of getting out, getting in front of the camera, getting in print, getting, their voices heard on Twitter, on, social media platforms around current events. It got me thinking that, the organization also, I think, has been remarkably responsive to sort of current events as they're happening in the field, as well, in terms of, or in the profession, I should say, in terms of sort of how the jobs that historians are doing are changing quite a lot, and where folks are landing. The path of tenure is becoming increasingly narrow in a lot of ways in higher ed. Increasingly we're seeing, folks, non-tenure track, contingent faculty, the sort of bar to reach the tenure track. You field your way through postdocs and internships and a number of things. And then also just sort of the wide, the term we've been using is sort of big tent of folks that are working in public history. And the organization, I think, has been really dynamic in participating in conversations around those changes. Our service committees, especially, we have service committees that, are, on a page sort of seem like a mile long, but they're all, I think, responsive to changes that are happening in the profession. And so not only do they provide our members opportunities to serve the professional community, but also are responsive to pressing needs in the profession, whether it be around contingent faculty issues, or whether it be around diversity issues, or any number of other things that really are very high on the radar, I think, of folks not just in academia and in higher ed, but in the humanities in general. These are questions, what role do the humanities play in public life? OAH is intimately engaged in those kinds of questions every single day. And so when you think of, being part of a community that is having those kinds of conversations, to me, that is a really critical piece of and an important part of why, well, I'm a member because I work here, obviously, but I've been a member, for 20 years. So, why did I keep re-upping? Because I felt like that was a critical part of, of being part of that. It was critical to be part of that conversation.
It's interesting, this meeting Monday night, Erica. It was only Monday night. It was only just a few days ago, but it does feel like it was a long time ago. In some ways, there's, this is one of the things that was fun for me about that meeting, and that oftentimes happens in the OAH. A couple of things that sort of, sort of little flashes, in my head of realizing things. So one of the things we talked about when we were figuring out, our statements was, what's our role vis-a-vis other professional organizations? And it's the AHA tends to be very quick with a response. We tend to be a little bit later, and then we sort of color in the lines and elaborate in different kinds of ways. And it got me thinking about all the professional organizations, that I'm in. And so, you imagine like the interdisciplinary one, like for me, American Studies Association, or the regional one, for me, the Western or the Southern. The disciplinary one, something like environmental history, the chronological one, something like SHEAR. There's a lot of these different possibilities. The diversity one for me, NASA, Native American Indigenous Studies. So if we think about where we might sit, in relation to our range of interests, and I think this applies to historians kind of across the board, right? We have all kinds of places where we can go. And within that sort of ecosystem, right, the OAH actually has its own particular kind of niche. And I think it's a really important one in the sense that it pulls so many of those things together. But it does so with a narrow enough kind of focus, the sort of American history kind of focus writ large, as we understand it to be, that it allows us to be integrative and allows us to be broad at the same time in really interesting and useful kinds of ways. And I think the other thing that comes up, I think, Beth just talked about the service committees, has been the ways in which, the OAH has thought long and hard about the profession of history in its largest dimensions. One of the things that really struck me, and it's something George Sanchez said last week, was there are moments where we are almost so far out in front that we're alone. And he mentioned particularly the issue of intellectual property rights in the Zoom era, as we are producing stuff, and putting it online and doing so much labor here. Who owns that stuff? And how do we think about it? Well, this is a moment where the OAH is, in one of the service committees, has thought long and hard and deeply about these kinds of issues and formulated, policies that, I think are quite important and quite strong for all of us who are thinking about history. So those are the kinds of service things I think that the organization also has to offer. And for folks who are interested, because I know we're supposed to talk about membership. For folks who are interested in those kinds of issues, right, these are wonderful fora for thinking through those problems in the company of good and smart and engaged people from a range of interests, right, in the historical professions.
So on that note of memberships, Deanna, do you have anything, on deck with the membership committee that we should know about? Any new things? Not to put you on the spot. I'm sorry if I am.
I should have done a little more homework, but the start of the semester is always super busy. But
of course,
this is something. We're thinking about a great deal of the types of things, the issues that we can be suggesting to the board, suggesting to the organization is, here are these like 9 ideas we come up in our meeting. Is there anything that we can do to sort of help facilitate that? And this meeting is one thing that came up at a prior meeting, right? To have, to do these kinds of responsive and interactive kinds of events, I think are essential. And we've tried different strategies in the past, 3 or 4 years, but I think that's kind of it. If whoever is tuning in, if you have suggestions, please reach out and let us know, because we certainly would like to be responsive to our members, right? And to find ways that we can do more and in engaging, but also in sort of responding to some of the right now kind of issues that are important, in the fact that, contingent faculty are often now also being asked to take furlough days, right? And that's just horrifying, right? I mean, their labor is already so much for so little, and yet here they are being asked yet again to give even more, right? And those are things we have to think about and try to find ways that we can be responsive to those.
I think another aspect of what I've been hearing this year in terms of membership is promoting sponsored student memberships as well. And I don't think it would be remiss for us to send out a directed appeal to those who can help. Perhaps paired with an easy or a link to how exactly that works on our membership page, and maybe a little bit more. Maybe we could think more about making sure that graduate students know that this is an option too, and if they find value in it, then suggesting that graduate departments might publicize this as an option too.
Yeah, I think that's right. And one of the things, and Deanna, I think it was on one of the first membership committee meetings that I sat in on in the fall, someone threw out the idea of, well, can we just have a box on the membership page where people can donate an extra $5 or $10 or whatever it might be. We can put that into a fund, and then when we get to a certain amount, we can just give away some sponsored memberships. And we actually rather quickly, because it wasn't, it was just sort of, I think, piloted rather quietly, just as part of the renewal calendar that we have, we're able to give out 20 sponsored memberships. And so I think that, and we did that by lottery, or folks are sending their names in now, and then the lottery will be chosen soon, or the winners of the lottery will be chosen. But the idea that, we recognize that, I think there are a lot of folks in the OAH, and I don't know if this is true in other organizations, it probably is, but I can't speak to that. But there are a lot of people who, when they're in a position to give back, they do that very readily and very often. And, the recognition that we all are part of a community, and, part of sustaining that community is helping younger members come into the organization in a meaningful way. And sometimes it's through things like the sponsored membership. So that's, that's been really great. There was a question that just dropped in the chat here from a viewer. I guess we are streaming live after all. A question that dropped in about, the question was, in this era of in this era of limited resources and time, and expanding commitments, can you speak to interest in partnering with orgs or institutions on programming and initiatives? And then maybe some already exist that I'm unfamiliar with. And I think, one of the things that jumps immediately to mind is our partnership with the National Park Service, which is a very long-standing partnership that the organization has had. And one in some ways that I think that flies under the radar a bit. The organization works with the National Park Service on dozens, literally every year, dozens of projects every year, where we help facilitate the National Park Service access to expertise, basically. We have members who take on projects as researchers and reviewers and site visitors and roundtable organizers, and it's a really amazing partnership that does tangible work for the public. It translates directly into the way that people digest history in national parks across the country. So that's sort of immediately something that comes to mind. I don't know, any others that,
didn't
yeah,
we
go
also,
ahead, Phil, please.
Didn't we also just have a live event with the National Archives?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I think, we received an NEH CARES grant as part of the sort of fall, late summer, early fall cycle of grant funding. And that's allowed us to partner with, like you said, with the National Archives to do webinars on presidential records and a number of other things that are, people are interested in, with the public. Phil, did you want to jump in with something too?
Yeah, just I think, in relation to both the membership conversation and this conversation about partnering, one of the things that, these last 2 years, we've had to cancel our live annual meetings, and that's been, quite sad, but we've also gone to the digital online form, as have all professional organizations. And I think what it points to is a different kind of future for thinking about the conference. One that should, on the one hand, I think, open this up to a broader set of people with interest in American history. And in that sense, sort of like welcoming more people in as members. My next door neighbor, a guy named John Hawley, who's a lighthouse fanatic here in Frankfort, Michigan, has written a book. Like, he's a perfect person. He loves history. He cares about history. And when we think about what the annual meeting looks like, I think in the future is going to look something like academics clustering together in a city, but it's going to look pretty different from that. And certainly for 2022, we're going to do a hybrid kind of conference. And we're hoping, of course, that we'll all be in Boston together, but that not all of us are going to be in Boston. And we will have a digital presence for that meeting. And that digital presence is about sort of reaching out to the broader landscape of folks who are interested in and care about American history. Who don't necessarily even fit the bill of professional historians. As Erica and Beth will know, and I will now confess to Deanna, I've just had this fantasy about all the kids who do History Day, getting interested in thinking about could a professional organization like ours actually offer something interesting to that pool of folks who are young historians in the making. And, my interactions with them, they're very excited about history at that particular moment. Why don't we grab onto that and nurture that? So, but to come back to the question of sort of partnerships, I think one of the things that we're also seeing is, local arrangements for these meetings have traditionally been, kind of partnering with the local historical society and setting up a few tours. And I think one of the things we're seeing now, the question that we're talking about with our partners in Boston for the 2022 meeting is much more around what kinds of partnerships can be sort of larger in scope. How do you, if we were planning a digital meeting or a hybrid meeting, how do we actually work with the Massachusetts Historical Society or the Museum of Fine Arts or local tribal museums and institutions to sort of enhance their footprint, right? For folks who are interested in and thinking about history. So I think we're seeing at this moment and looking off into the future as we continue to develop these things, ways in which the annual meeting is going to change its nature. And it's always been part of the three-legged stool for, the OAH and other professional organizations, but I think it's going to be a much bigger kind of thing for partnerships and memberships, both together.
Yeah, that's kind of exciting for sure to think about that potential for local organizations, local museums and things. And just an idea that came to me right now as you were talking, Philip, was wouldn't it be great to do like a live walking tour? If you can't be there, wouldn't that be great to take people on this tour of a museum or of the city of Boston, right? Because there's all these the Freedom Trail in Boston is quite fun to sort of traipse around and look at the different things. But if you can't go, that would be a great opportunity to have historians on the path with people.
And Deanna, it's so great that you're saying that, because that's exactly the kind of thing that we're talking about, right? Indigenous Boston, Afro-Indigenous Boston, which has this really super interesting history. In Boston, it turns out is a great place because it is a small and contained sort of space with a lot of stuff, in a relatively contained place. It also reminds me of one other thing that we've been thinking about for the 2022 conference. We go into different kinds of places, and we really are always interested in figuring out, how do we engage the folks who are doing the teaching of, our students in the public schools and, in the K-12 kind of realm. And one of the things that's always been hard, there are a number of barriers that I think we're on the very edge of just kind of getting past many of these. So a lot of what matters, I think, and is important to some of the folks in the teaching professions is, what does professional development credit look like? And how does that work? And how does accreditation work? And if we're a national organization going into a urban space with a regional or state level accreditation thing, it all gets real messy. And so we've been trying to partner with the National Humanities Center and Andy Mink about sort of figuring out ways to broaden our accreditation kind of strategy, so we can make teachers from other places welcome and not have to sort of reinvent the wheel every year as we go into a different place, right? Setting up those kinds of structures as well. So that's, I think, another good example of partnerships that may actually do the work that we want to do in terms of broadening, our membership and our engagement.
Yeah, and one thing that we've, it's a bit on the horizon, but we are establishing and have established a number of partnerships, ramping up to the 250th celebration of the Declaration of Independence in 2026. And so for the 250th, we are partnering with, for example, the American Association for State and Local History. We have a number of initiatives planned with them, and we're doing some of that legwork and planning now in advance of some of those bigger celebrations. Smithsonian and a number of others. And so I think that we are partnering in some meaningful ways, not just right now, but in sort of longer term planning for programming. Right now, also, I just got off a call before I jumped on here. We do webinars with the folks at Made by History that are really engaging on questions about, how do you expand historians' public voice? I don't know that we would call it partnering, but we've received very generous grant funding from a number of foundations. Mellon Foundation right now especially is supporting a number of our initiatives. We have, as Phil had mentioned earlier, the Japan-US Friendship Commission. We have a great exchange between academics in the US and grad students in the US and those in Japan that make for some really fruitful, not just sort of scholarly work, but networking opportunities as well, which are really exciting. But, I would encourage anyone that's interested in sort of seeing the range of things that we do to go to our website. A little plug for our website, oah.org, or follow us on Twitter. At @the_OAH is our Twitter, just to kind of keep up on, on what it is we're doing, and hopefully where Facebook is, because we're supposed to be streaming there. So, yeah, I mean, the organization is really dynamic. One of the things when I was interviewing for the position of executive director, when I started to dive into the OAH website, I was like, oh my God, they're doing all of this stuff. It just was really, the amount of stuff was overwhelming to me in a lot of ways, but exciting at the same time. So, so that was a great question. I think we're getting towards where we need to be thinking about wrapping up. We have a hard stop at the end of the hour. So, I'd open it to anyone who wants to make any last thoughts, comments, plugs for anything OAH related, or your own things. Go for it.
I'd like to make a plug for the amazing staff at the OAH, and then looking forward to 2023. I mentioned the list of resources that the OAH put out in relationship to the Capitol assault, and that stuff doesn't just happen. This kind of responsive history work is exciting. It's timely. People feel passionate about it, but it takes a lot of hard work. And so I know that there were many hours spent by folks on the JEH and the other offices at the OAH to put those resources together. So I just want to put a plug in for the work of the amazing staff. And then we plan things way ahead in the calendar. So as Phil's talking about the amazing 2022 conference in Boston, I've just finalized the program and local resource committees for 2023 in LA, which could be the first time that we all gather in person, knock on wood. But I would expect that there's probably still going to be a virtual element to some part of these conferences moving forward because of the opportunities that it allows us to have. But especially coming from Minneapolis in the dead of winter, thinking about 2023 in LA brings me joy and sunshine every day. So there's lots of things to look forward to with our conferences in the future.
Yeah, and I think on that note, also just keep in mind that we are having, as Phil had mentioned earlier, an all virtual conference this year. 2021 annual meeting is still happening. It's just going to be all online, which makes it even more accessible to everyone. You can jump on our website again and hop right onto that page and see a lot of the amazing things that'll be happening there. We were supposed to be in Chicago, and so a lot of it is sort of Chicago themed, which is fun. But you know, some really amazing panels are actually being recorded right now. That'll be some will be live streamed, some will be on demand, and it's shaping up to be a really, really great event. So hopefully we'll get a lot of engagement on that.
I know that the membership committee at our virtual conference, we usually host a graduate student mixer, right? So we have a soundtrack being put together and things for that for the Friday night graduate student lounge, which will be kind of fun. So.
Yeah, people are doing playlists and themed cock and mocktails, and so I think, you know, for the sort of social events that are going to be happening online. So hopefully it'll be a lot of good serious study and a lot of good fun at the same time. So, all right. Does that wrap up? I think that kind of wraps up our conversation. I somehow kind of became the de facto moderator here, but so thank you to Deanna Beachley, Erica Lee, and Phil Deloria for joining us, and for anyone who may or may not be out there on Facebook. I hope we streamed live. We had a little technical difficulty at the beginning. This is our first time doing this, so hopefully you'll indulge us on that. But thanks for thanks for joining us, and feel free to reach out to the organization anytime. Our contact information is online, and we'd love to hear from you, and also love to have you as members. So hop on board. All right. Thanks, everybody. I think that's a wrap. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.